Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the California Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, thank you for joining us for tonight's Far and Wild event, a special virtual celebration of our annual Big Picture Natural World Photography Competition. My name is Laurel Allen, your Academy host, and we would like to start just by sending our support to everyone impacted by recent wildfires, hurricanes, and of course the pandemic, which probably means just about everyone. These things remind us of how delicate our relationship to nature is, but they also make this an especially good time to celebrate photographers who are working to document and protect the natural world. Each year, we mark the opening of our Big Picture exhibit, which features winning and finalist images from that year's competition with an in-person awards ceremony at the Academy. But since the museum is still closed at this time, we're honoring our 2020 winners through this special live stream. If you do live in the Bay Area, however, please know that the Big Picture exhibit is installed and ready for our museum visitors to see just as soon as we can welcome you back. This year's Big Picture exhibit is the culmination of work from 807 photographers hailing from 65 countries who collectively submitted 6,418 images, all capturing incredible moments of life on Earth and inspiring actions to protect it. Tonight, we'll take a virtual journey around the world to explore spectacular winning images from this year's competition. You'll hear from acclaimed wildlife photographer and Big Picture jury chair Suzi Eszterhas, who will be in conversation with the Academy's own Dr. Luiz Rocha about extreme photography in the world. You'll also meet renowned wildlife photographer, Greenpeace ambassador, and Big Picture judge Roie Galitz, and you'll hear directly from some of this year's winners as they discuss the making of their remarkable photos. And as we get started in earnest, we'd like to thank our generous Big Picture sponsors, Bloomberg Philanthropies and Biographic. Okay, so there's only one real way to get a program about a photo competition started, and that is with our 2020 grand prize winner, Andy Parkinson from Christchurch, England. His winning image, aptly titled Hairball, features a mountain hare in the subarctic conditions of a Scottish mountain. In this video, Andy gives us a fantastic behind-the-scenes look at how he himself dealt with the same extreme conditions this hare did to get his remarkable shot.
So hello from not-so-sunny Derbyshire in the UK. Just a quick note from me, really, just to say thank you. What an incredible honour it is for me to have received this award. About the actual image itself, it was taken hundreds of miles from here up in the Scottish mountains in winter. We'd been up there for probably 5 weeks, and in all of that time we had one day where we had the perfect conditions. These are really the dream conditions. We need high winds, mobile snow, so really freezing conditions, and ideally a fresh dump of snow in the days preceding. This then creates this incredible spindrift that surges and rages across the open plateau. And a lot of the time, most of the hares will disappear. They'll actually go to ground. They dig sort of tunnels under the snow in the ditches up on this moorland. But on this day, this one particular hare, a hare that I've known for a number of years and I've worked with over the last 3 years, she's incredibly confiding, but she still requires all of the elements of trust and respect that I'd afford to any other living creature. I still creep towards her over a period of a long time. And then when I'm in position, then it's just a case of lying quietly within a few meters of her, waiting for these periods of activity that really only come about every half an hour or 45 minutes. A snowdrift has formed up against the side of my body, up against the side of my camera, and it's quite routine to end up shaking uncontrollably. And yeah, she was basically just disappearing into the snow. The snow was forming all around her and she was disappearing. And then in this moment, when all the snow had met her back, it had formed a sheet of ice. And so as she sat up to groom, this sheet of ice that had formed on her back started to break sort of almost tectonically. And she formed into this perfect spherical shape. And at the time I'm just sort of shooting, I can barely even see through the camera. And it's only in hindsight, it's only looking back through the images later that images like this, out of the 100 that I took that day, they sort of pop out. So yeah, I'm aware of how lucky it was, but I'm also humbled and really proud that an animal that's, it's not one of the great icons of the world. It's not a polar bear or a lion or a tiger. This is a small native species to the UK. It's great that it is able to be seen on a global platform. Hopefully these images might have in some way given a voice to these creatures and enable them to become ambassadors for their species. Their future will hopefully be a little bit brighter because strange people like me go and lie next to them up on the mountains in the most incredible conditions and take pictures and are lucky enough for things like this to happen to us.
Well, I think there's actually no question that Andy and other strange people like him have contributed to a brighter future for the mountain hare, because the Scottish Parliament actually recently voted to give them special protections under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. Okay, so next up, we are honored to welcome live Suzi Eszterhas and Dr. Luiz Rocha for a conversation that was actually inspired by Andy's grand prize winning photo about some of the extreme conditions, creatures, and interactions that wildlife photographers encounter in the field. Welcome, Suzi. Hi. Welcome, Luiz. Hi. Thank you both so much for being here. Okay, so before I start peppering you with questions, I'd like to tell our viewers a little bit more about each of you. Suzi Eszterhas is an award-winning and widely published wildlife photographer who's perhaps best known for documenting newborn animals and family life in the wild. She is the founder and executive director of Girls Who Click, a nonprofit dedicated to encouraging young women to enter the still male-dominated profession of wildlife photography. And she's a dedicated conservationist who lends her images and expertise to help raise funds and awareness for several environmental organizations around the globe. And we are honored to be one of those, as Suzi has served as our Big Picture jury chair since the very, very beginning. So hello again. Dr. Luiz Rocha is the Academy's curator of Icthyology, which is fishes, and has been devoted to coral reefs and reef fishes since childhood. That passion has driven him to study hundreds of coral reefs around the world, publish more than 150 scientific papers, and dive to depths of 500 feet, that's a correct number, as part of the Academy's Hope for Reef Mesophotic Deep Dive Rebreather team, which explores one of Earth's most understudied realm. An extremely talented photographer in his own right, who also happens to rely on photography for his science. He has taken more than 50,000 underwater photos to document reef fishes so far. So welcome again to both of you. And I'd like to start by asking you both the same question, which is, if you had 10 minutes to pack for an expedition, what would you take and why? Suzi, will you get us started?
Okay, so for me, there's no easy answer because every expedition is totally different. So to solve that problem, I've basically made a 4-page packing list that has everything I might need for any expedition. And obviously it's vastly different. You know, sometimes you're taking snow boots, parkas, other times you're taking, you know, really thin field gear for jungle stuff. Sometimes I'm also packing like heels and a fancy dress because I might be doing field work and also going to some sort of event at the same time. So lots of strange things in the bag, but yeah, there's no simple answer.
Yeah, equipment wise, do you have some go-tos that you will share?
Yeah, so I used to absolutely love my 500 mil lens. Now I think I gravitate more to my 200 to 400 that I absolutely, you know, use on most trips. The exception would be jungle stuff. I use a lot of 7200 stuff for my ape work.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah.
Luiz.
The answer for me, I think it's quite simple. I other than taking the gear out of the bags to clean and rinse and maintain properly, I don't unpack.
Right.
I mean, I've been going on expeditions so frequently that I absolutely don't unpack. I come back, I make sure everything is clean, everything is charged, and I put everything back in the bag. Right. And then when I'm ready to go, I have a gear list too. So I just go through the list to make sure everything is there, and then I'm ready to go.
Right, and you have the luxury of kind of knowing roughly where you're going or what you'll experience, like, or being consistent, I guess, in terms of the conditions. Yeah. Right.
So I only usually take, because I have to take so much scuba gear. So as you said, I dive to 500 feet. It's an enormous amount of gear that we take to the field just for the diving. So because of that, I try to minimize my photography gear as much as I can. So I just take my Nikon DSLR with 2 lenses, one to photograph fish, the 60mm macro, and one to photograph scenics, a wide angle. I usually take the 10.5mm fisheye lens for the wide angle shots, and that's about it. And the housing and the strobes, and yeah, and they stay on the bag the whole time.
Okay. All right. This next question is specifically for Suzi from a viewer. Is there an animal or a subject that you've always wanted to photograph but haven't been able to yet for some reason?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, I made a list, and I actually made this wall size. I call it my nerd calendar, and I have it behind my door in my office.
Oh, excellent.
Basically is any given month of any year, what animal gives birth. So if I have a gap in my schedule in March, I can be okay, who's giving birth in March that's on my bucket list? So I have 72 subjects on my bucket list. I think I've gotten through a few of them since I made the list. But I got to get cracking because, I got to live a long time to be able to do 72 different stories. So there's a lot to go through. But I would say close to the top, I'd really like to do gibbons. I was supposed to do them in the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, it got canceled because of the pandemic. And then I would also like to do baby tapir.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I'd like to make a request that you post your bucket list on Twitter or Instagram, because I would love to see what that looks like.
So nerdy.
So great. And this one's specifically for Louise. Many of this year's winners are also working scientists. So I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit more about how you use photography in your work.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to talk a little bit in the presentation when I get there. But the initial drive for me for photography was to document things for my scientific work. The animals I work with, reef fish, they're very colorful, and color is a very, very useful character on taxonomy. So it's useful to differentiate species. But up until the 80s and 90s, the technology for underwater photography was not very well developed. Not only that, but also the printing was not very well developed. So there were not fish identification guides. There was no internet. Remember that, right? So there were no fish identification guides with underwater photos comparing the fish. So there was not a lot of scientists that used that as a tool. Beginning in the late 80s, early 90s, then it became very popular. That's when I started taking pictures, and I right away started documenting things to put in my scientific papers.
Okay, great. Well, we do get to hear more, because our next thing we're going to shift to, which I am really excited for, and I know I'm going to say that I'm excited a lot tonight, but this is the section where you each are going to share more about your own work, including lots and lots of beautiful images. So Suzi, I'll ask you to start us off again, and we will see you right after.
Okay, well, so I thought I would just give you a little insight to Andy. I absolutely love Andy's photo. I also love his video because he's hit it on the money for a few different things. One, that we're all strange, and two, that we torture ourselves and we consider these things sort of prime conditions, but we do like to be really hard on our bodies and our minds. So I took this photo up in Arctic Canada. And this is actually a project that I put off for many years because I was born with a circulation disorder that leaves me very prone to getting frostbite. And so I've been warned a lot, and I was quite concerned about being in conditions that, gets to be about -40 up there. So I put this off for many years, and then I solved the problem with, number one, getting enough equipment and enough layers. But also, number two, I went to my physician and I said, is there anything that we can do medication-wise to sort of stop the onset of this, or at least slow it down when I'm exposed? And the first thing she suggested was actually Viagra, which I promptly denied because it can have the same effects on women as men, although a little bit less extreme. So we decided Viagra was probably not a good idea. And we moved on to the idea of taking high blood pressure medicine, which was hilarious because I actually have blood pressure that's on the lower end. So while I was taking it, we did a test run in the Bay Area where I live. And while I was taking it, I had to be really careful, getting up from sitting very slowly, because if I did it too fast, I would pass out, which obviously is not what you'd want around a polar bear. And then we finally did this test after being on it for 3 days. We did this test where I stuck my feet in an ice bath and kept them in there for a few minutes to see if it would delay the onset. And guess what? It worked. So modern conveniences and technology really do help us with some of these elements. And then the other thing too is that this job takes extraordinary patience, particularly when you're dealing with baby animals. You can have situations where the parents can be quite shy. So this was a situation for me with this family of jackals. The parents, the dad was actually pretty cool, but mom was pretty shy. This project I did when I was in a 3-year stint earlier in my career in the Masai Mara, living in that tent in a bush camp. And I just literally floated from one subject to the next. I started with cheetahs, then moved on to following a lion pride, and then finally got around to being interested in jackals. And it took me about 17 days to get this family completely used to me. And that 17 days, it's hard to really explain exactly how brutal the 17 days can be. I was moving the vehicle into the den site basically at sunrise and then pulling out at sunset to have minimal disturbance, because obviously even if you started far away, you arriving kind of got everybody on high alert. And then I would just stay in the car all day and not move it 14 hours. So, you know, you're in this cramped hot car for 14 hours, peeing in water bottles. There's nothing sexy about this job. And trying to think of like every little detail, like I pinned a blanket behind me to get rid of my silhouette because I figured out mom didn't like that. And then I started taking pictures actually before I could actually take effective pictures, just so that she would get used to the sound. So every day it was just like moving a little bit and a little bit closer. And then she finally calmed down. But being in this bush camp for me was a dream. I didn't have electricity for the first 1.5 years, and I never did have a toilet in the 3 years that I lived there. But it was something that, you know, was a massive dream of mine, and something that I'll always cherish. And then this is actually the subject that I was with right before the pandemic. I actually had to leave this leopard mom so that I could get back and be with my mom and make sure she was safe during the pandemic. But I left this leopard mom. She had a cub that was a few days old. So I have this strange part of my job where, because I specialize in baby animals, there's a lot of, I work with trackers and people on the ground, and there's a lot of talk about like nipples. Like, you know, did you see her nipples? Do the nipples look good? How does the belly look? So basically, do the nipples look like they're being suckled by a little one? And so lots of text messages back and forth of close-ups of nipple shots of leopards laying in trees. So really weird stuff. And then when I got on the ground, I basically realized that a newborn of this age, of only 3 days old or so, moms keep them so concealed that it, you know, I thought, you know, 4-week-old leopard cubs was challenging, which is what I did with this mom previously. But 3 days old was enormously challenging, because basically she doesn't want anybody to see them. She doesn't want humans to see them. She doesn't want any animals to see them. So she keeps her really, really tiny newborns in small spaces. So for this little male cub, she kept him in the first spot for 5 days. So that means 5 days we just sit there 14 hours a day staring at this bush, and we would see mom leave occasionally. Second spot, 6 days in a hole in a log. And that was an okay spot, because we got to occasionally see him peek, maybe like 10 seconds of a day, and maybe get a photo. And the third spot was a nightmare spot. She kept the cub in that hole in the tree for 11 solid days. And we never saw the cub. The cub was deep inside. So patience is something that you have to have an abundance of. And then some of these photo shoots that I go on can be challenging from a political or cultural perspective. So this is a Sumatran orangutan rescue shoot that I did for Sumatran Orangutan Society. I'm an ambassador for that organization. And I went out with the team that was working on the orangutan rescues, that included informants that were working in these rural villages that would basically tip off SOS to orangutans that were either being held captive in someone's home and being sold on the black market, or ones that were isolated in palm oil plantations. And this was a pretty sketchy project for me, because the first night that we arrived in a village to try to rescue 3 orangutans that were on an isolated fragment of habitat where they couldn't live anymore, and they were essentially starving to death. The guys dropped me off at a little guest house, and then they went and stayed somewhere else. And we got death threats, and I got a knock at the door basically saying that the team had to leave, and there was a drunken mob after them. And they thought I was safer at the guest house because they weren't sure they were going to get out unscathed, and they thought that no one knew that I was connected to them, and they would send an unmarked car for me the next morning. Luckily, the guys got out unscathed, and they sent the unmarked car like they said they would. And we switched locations to another spot. And there we stayed in a house together in a village, and I managed to get that photograph. But tough conditions, you know, the bottom right photo is me essentially where I bathed. So some of these elements are challenging to also live in. And then finally, along with baby animals, sloths have really captured my heart. And this is my favorite sloth photo I've taken. And sometimes we have to do stuff before we leave from home to practice and to get ready. So I had never taken an underwater photo in my life. And so I practiced with an underwater camera in a pool with a teddy bear. So the teddy bear had floaties, and that way I could get used to the gear, used to being underwater, so that I wasn't doing things for the first time if we were able to find a sloth. This teddy bear, by the way, has become a friend of mine. He's been a pangolin in a tree for me before, and he's been a koala in a hospital and lots of other situations. So we do some crazy stuff. My landlord thinks I'm a little crazy in the backyard at times, but that's what we have to do to get the shots. So that's a little snippet of my career.
That's fantastic, Suzi, and it's such a good look at, I think, something we'll hear a lot about throughout the show, which is just the kind of investment of time it takes to really get close enough to take the photos that grab us. So yeah, wonderful. Okay, Luiz, we'd love to welcome you back to the screen so that we can, and okay, so I will ask you to go ahead and dive in, like terrible pun intended.
All right, here we go. So unlike Suzi, I rarely take pictures out of the water. Most of my pictures are taken in the water, and that's not my picture. I'm in the photo there. I just shared this one. It's from my taken by my really good, talented photographer friend Tane Sinclair Taylor. He's based in Australia, and sometimes he comes with us to document the expedition and take pictures of the action. But that's the setup I use there. It's a Nauticam camera that is specifically designed to go to the depths that we go to. So normally underwater housings for DSLR cameras, which is what we need to take really good fish pictures, they don't go to 500 feet, which is the depth that I do a lot of my studies. Most of them are depth rated to about 200 feet. Some of them are depth rated to 300 feet. And I flooded my share of them until Nauticam came up with this rig that is rated to 500 feet. And I took it a little deeper than that even, and it did okay. So this is the camera of choice that I've been using for the past 3 years or so. In this case here, I have it with a macro lens. So if you see in the front of it, there's just a tiny little flat port. And that's what we use for macro photography. Something else peculiar about underwater photography is that you have to commit to the type of picture that you want to take. You can't really see a subject and then switch from a macro lens to a wide angle lens, or from a wide angle to a telephoto lens. You have to have the same lens for the whole dive. You can only open that housing there after you water the water, so you're committed. So for that dive, I was only taking pictures of fish with my 60mm macro lens, and Tani was taking pictures of me. What I wanted to show you on this picture too is the kind of gear that I'm using. So if you're a scuba diver, you know that this is not the regular type of scuba diving gear. That's a rebreather. Closed circuit rebreather is a different type of equipment that allows us to go to 500 feet, to those deep depths, safely and cost effectively. So we have to breathe helium at those depths, and helium is very expensive. So we don't want to be using normal scuba gear, just blowing bubbles out. So we just, with this equipment, allows us to do is recirculate the helium. So we're breathing the same helium and not spending $10, $15 every breath. But before I did all that, I started way back in the 90s. This is actually not the first underwater picture I took, but it's a picture I took in the first dive. So it's the first session of underwater pictures I took. And I was surprised at how well it turned out. I borrowed a Nikon 5 from a friend of mine. I was a dive master at a dive shop in my hometown at the time. I was in college, and I borrowed a Nikon 5. And as I said before, the first thing I wanted to do was to document every fish I saw and talk about them in my scientific papers. And that's exactly what I did there. So I took that picture that was with film, with a slide. And so that's a scan slide. And later, so that was about 1995 that I took that picture. On 1998, we wrote this paper. This is one of the pages of the scientific article. And sometimes when we talk about the fish, we show the picture of the fish. So that's the That's the picture right there of the fish. So that was in shallow water. It wasn't at the depths we dive now. Back then, we just did normal scuba diving to normal depths. So that was about at 60 feet. This one is much, much deeper than that. So this is one that was taken much more recently with the gear that I just showed. This is Tosanoides aphrodite. So those depths, what is super interesting and exciting for me is that whenever we go to those depths, we find things that are undescribed, undiscovered, unknown, which was the case for this fish. And the photo there actually allowed us to go back to the same spot and collect that fish and then describe it. They basically give it a scientific name, which it did not have before. So this was a trip we did to St. Paul's Rocks in Brazil. And the first dive I did, I only took my camera. We didn't take any nets or anything. And I saw this fish and I thought it was incredible. And the first thing I did was take a picture of it. And then when we came back, after we reviewed all of the photos, I saw that photo and we decided, yes, that's a new species. We have to go back and collect it. To be able to put a scientific name on a species, you have to write a scientific paper about it and use actual specimens, physical specimens of the species. So that it's preserved on a museum like the California Academy of Sciences for posterity as a type specimen, so that people can compare other specimens they find to this one to make sure if it's not the same species or not. So as we did with the other photo of the moray that I just showed in my hometown, in this one, we also used it to write a paper about it. So that's the right-hand side photo there. That's one of the pages of the species description. Tosanoides aphrodite. And on the left there is something else we are doing more and more lately with the discoveries and the photos that we take. We're using those photos not only for the actual science side of it, which is the scientific paper on the right side, but also for the scientific communication of it. So if we, in this case, Forbes wrote a really nice article about the discovery of this species, and they illustrated it with the photos that I took. So reutilizing the same picture many times over. We also, so as I said, sometimes we take the macro lens for fish pictures like these. Sometimes we take the wide angle lens. And for the wide angle lens, what I use it the most for is to document the habitat, to take pictures of what's on the bottom, what we see at those depths. As I said, everything is different, everything is unique, everything is, a lot of these species are new and undescribed. So we know very little because it's so hard to get to these depths, to this habitat. We know very, very little about what goes on, what lives at those depths. And one of the things we really wanted to do is to document this habitat. So every time I take the wide angle lens, this is what I do here. I take like wide angle shots to document the habitat and show everybody what is living at those depths. This was taken at about 350 feet depth in Palau. This one, so even though I use photography mostly for scientific purposes, I also love photography. I mean, I fell in love with it. I think even before I started taking pictures underwater, I was already interested in photography. And whenever I'm in the field now, I try to take these kinds of more good composition, kind of artistic side pictures. And this one is one that I actually way back in the day, in 2004 or 5, I think, when I was a postdoc, I had some extra time and I started applying for underwater photography contests. And this one, I actually won an underwater photography contest for Scuba Diving magazine, which I thought was incredible. But that was, I think, was the last underwater photography contest I applied for, just because life got crazy and science took all of my time. I don't even have time to do that now. So I wanted to finish the talk, my session of it, with this particular species, this particular photo, which is a species that I haven't shared much at all before, because it's one of those that doesn't have a name yet. So the first one that I showed you, that neon colored yellow and pink one, was Tosanoides aphrodite. That one we discovered and we already put a name on it. This one I photographed. We know it's new, but it doesn't have a name yet. So it's an undescribed species that I photographed in Micronesia at 495 feet depth. So it's one of the deepest photos I've ever taken. Again, with that flat port with the macro lens at about 490 feet. And it took me about a year or two to even get used to all of the gear, all of the dive gear that I had around me, and take useful pictures with it. Back at the beginning, I was so worried about the whole diving side of it that I didn't even take my camera, or the few times I did, the photos were not good because something was wrong with the equipment. I wasn't very comfortable. So it takes a long, long time just to get used to being at those depths, get used to the equipment. Just to give you guys an idea, I weigh 165 pounds in a 160 pounds in a good day. My gear all put together weighs about 180 pounds. So that's the amount of just not counting the camera. Yeah, that's just the dive gear. And that's what I'm dragging underwater, chasing those fish and trying to take those pictures. So with that, I think we're going to talk about the actual pictures now, the contest pictures, right?
We are, but I was going to ask too, when you are at those very deepest depths doing work, you actually don't have much time to get things done, do you?
No, it's at 500 feet. I think the longest dive we did was 6 minutes. You can't stay more than 5 or 6, 7 minutes at those depths. Otherwise, decompression gets too long. So we absorb so much gas in our body that we can't go up straight up. We have to do decompression stops. And the deeper you go, the longer those decompression stops are. So 5 minutes at 500 feet would be 5 hours of decompression.
Yeah.
So 5 hours to get come back up. It's, yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And yeah, we'd love to welcome Suzi back to the screen. And as Luis said, we're going to turn our attention back to the competition now, because you've each chosen 3 to 5 finalist images that really, really particularly inspired you. And they're all really remarkable. And I think they also really highlight the depth of talent in this competition. So Suzi, as always, I'll ask you to kick us off.
Yeah. So I absolutely love this cheetah image. So I've photographed cheetahs on and off for 15 years. I've never seen anything like this, both as a sighting and also in terms of a photograph. And, you know, some people might look at this and say like, oh yeah, you just got lucky. First of all, I love the fact that she's an amateur and that she won first place in this category. I love seeing amateurs win first place. Of course, sometimes we have professionals win first place, but I love it when amateurs do. But she undoubtedly was in the right place, but there was potentially a lot of patience involved, waiting, but also to be able to execute this with precision. If you think about how fast this is all happening and the fact that cheetahs are the fastest land mammal on Earth, this whole situation must have happened incredibly fast. And I can say from experience, it is incredibly difficult to get a good freeze action shot of a cheetah sprinting, let alone leaping in the air upside down, grabbing onto this impala is just an extraordinary photograph. I love this photo. The next photo, yes, the bee eaters. These guys I love because they're like a painting. So there's some photos where you look at it and it's like, wow, I could have that in my house on my wall and not get tired of looking at it every single day. This is one of those photos. To me, I think it's very painterly in terms of its muted tones. I also love the fact that Salvador broke a golden rule of photography, which is, you know, blown out white backgrounds. Typically, we consider to be something that's not a good thing. Most of the time when we have a blown out white background, we often don't shoot, or if we do, we throw it in the trash can. But in this case, this is what really helps to make this image. Without this blown out white sky, it wouldn't have this gorgeous painterly effect. So this is one that I love and would love to have in my home myself. These mushrooms, they're like a dream, they're like a fairy tale. And the nice thing is that this guy went out and I would say his name, but I would murder it. He went out in his village in Greece and he actually had the intention of creating a photograph that was like a fairy tale. And so, you know, it's one thing when you accidentally get something great, but when you actually go out to try to create something, and for me, this is a work of art. It's absolutely beautiful. And he succeeded. I also love the fact that this is in his little village. You know, this isn't an incredibly charismatic subject, just like Andy's hair. Mushrooms are something we often overlook and sometimes we don't even see. So it's a reminder that there is beauty at our feet all the time. And if we're just mindful of it and we look for these elements in nature, especially I think as we're in lockdown and we're all kind of getting to know our backyards and neighborhoods, and that we can find these little glimpses of beauty and make art out of them. And this guy really did. This one I love. This is charming. This is so charming. I could see this in a kid's book. I love the fact, so the story behind this image is that this is an elephant reaching into a kitchen at a research station, and he's being really naughty and trying to grab some food. And it's a really funny story because they eventually started locking up the food in a way that the elephants couldn't get to them. And then apparently the elephants got very angry and actually did some damage to the roofs when they did that. So there's that funny part. There's also a little bit of a sad part. It's a big sad part. This is an area, this is in Malawi in a national park called Kasungu. And in Kasungu, some of the elephants have had terrible situations with poachers. And so as a result, they've become quite aggressive towards humans and quite brazen and bold. So I think that's part of the problem there, is the conflict. So this is an image that has a really light, happy side, but also a dark side to it as well, and a big reality check. I love this image. And then I think we have our crab eaters. Yes. So, okay. So this is a fantastic image. I also love its title, and it's not, we didn't put titles on here, but this is, he called it Frozen Mobile Home. And I love that for this image. So these are crab eater seals. And most of the time we see photos of crab eaters, they're actually topside on land. So that's the vast majority of tourists that go down Antarctica go, and they see the Antarctic wildlife topside. This guy did an underwater trip and was able to get some amazing views of these animals that we commonly see, but really we don't see them like this. So the other thing I think too is that as someone here, I photographed seals when I was younger because they're so close to my home. It's actually, seals are a subject where, people like seals, but it's hard to get them really excited about them. It's not the same as like a bear. And so to do something and create an image where you've got this charismatic subject in this gorgeous environment, I think is quite challenging, and he's done it. And he got the first place in aquatic life. Very, very well deserved.
Wonderful.
Those are my favorites.
Yeah.
Can you go back to the seals one? I have one. Yeah, there you go. So the other thing I really loved about this photo is that the first time I looked at it, I had a double take because I thought it was multiple exposure. I thought it was the same seal swimming around in multiple exposures. They're in this like tight formation, but no, it's 4 different seals. Yeah. And I loved your story about the code. That's something I would never do. I grew up in Brazil. I'm a 100% tropical beast. The first time I saw snow in my life, I was 35 or so, something like that. I travel around, but I always travel around in the summer to the northern hemisphere, and then vice versa. But yeah, so for this photo here, the water is actually below freezing. This is in Antarctica. The water is below freezing. Salt water doesn't freeze unless you make it really cold. So the water is -1 Celsius there, so it's below the freezing point of fresh water. Yeah. And the equipment, the dive equipment that the photographer needed there was akin to almost the same that I use, because you need a dry suit, you need an extra tent to put the dry suit. You're exposed to those really cold water conditions, and then you come up with a photo like that. It's just incredible, and something I personally would never do. I mean, I dread the day that I have to dive here in California, and that's 60 degrees, several degrees warmer than what it is in 30 degrees warmer than what it is in Antarctica. So yeah, let's go to the next one. Yeah, so this photo I loved, and I think it's a theme for the whole competition here. This is again another species that is not charismatic. This is one of the most common toads in all of Europe. Bufo is one of the first species of toad that was ever described. So it's in everybody's backyard, and the story that Matthew told in the notes for us was really incredible. He spent the whole day looking for a subject to photograph, going over several different places, And then when he gave up, he was going back home and he saw this little pond under this waterfall. So that white stuff on the right corner there is a waterfall actually falling into the pond. And he jumped in the water and saw this marvelous thing going up. So I think it's really interesting and technically challenging in many ways, because he was really close to the toads, so it's hard to light them properly like that. It's an interesting behavior. The toads are mating there, and it captures the whole scene of even the waterfall behind the above the pond there. So it's really striking image to me. The next one, yes, that one. The photographer is also a scientist. So he's not a professional photographer; he's actually a professional scientist. But what really struck me was that there were two winning images. Actually, the two images that were taken with relatively same techniques, which we call black water diving. So those images, this one and the other one was the octopus. If you go through the website, you can see the other one that was taken in the similar conditions, are dives that divers and scientists alike do at night on open water in the open ocean. Sometimes 5,000, 4,000, 6,000 feet the bottom is, but you stay relatively shallow. So that picture will probably be taken at 30 feet or so, but it's in a place where there's no bottom. So the attention that you have to pay to your diving, to your buoyancy, not to lose control of everything, and then kind of get close to these tiny objects. This is the size of a quarter, maybe. It's just, again, incredible and as extreme as you can get in terms of conditions to take pictures. And on top of everything, the behavior itself is very, very interesting. The baby fish there is a species of fish, a species of jack, a family Corangidae, that lives in symbiosis with those jellyfish. So the jellyfish is not eating the fish. The fish is just taking a ride and protecting itself inside the jellyfish because of the stings. Nothing else comes close to the jellyfish. And the jellyfish gains propulsion. So the fish is swimming around, it's pushing the jellyfish around. So both animals there gain, and we call that a symbiotic relationship. So again, extreme photography, interesting subject, fantastic behavior, good stuff all around.
Those are really stunning. Thank you both for talking us through what you see in them. It adds so much more. And thank you both for your time. That was fantastic. And viewers, if you would like to see and hear more about Suzi and Luiz's work, follow them on both Instagram and Twitter. We can drop those in the comments for you, but they're easily to find online. Yeah, thank you just once again.
Thanks
and we'll take care.
Thank you.
Bye for now. So we are now going to shift our focus to the stories behind our 2020 category winners. And we're going to start that with a pair of really beautiful videos. The first one is from Peter Niskrecki, who is an entomologist, conservation biologist, and photographer working in Mozambique to support local conservationists in their efforts to rebuild Gorongosa National Park after setbacks from the recent civil war. So we're going to hear about how he captured his incredible shot of a bat drinking water, which he titled A Sip, and which took first place in our 2020 Wing Life category. After that, we're going to meet Jack Wonderly, who's this year's winner of the Human Nature category, which examines the complex relationship between humans and nature. Images in this category illustrate the range of impacts that humans have on the environment, positive and negative, as Wonderly's Caught by Cats does so well.
My name is Peter Niskrecki, and I'm a biologist and nature photographer working in Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique. Bats are some of the most remarkable mammals, some of the most remarkable animals on the planet, and I've been studying their behavior and biology for the last few years. And one of the aspects of their behavior that really fascinates me is their drinking behavior. A place like that, this little pen behind me, is one of the remaining bodies of water right now in the dry season in Gorongosa, and this is a place where bats congregate because they have to drink every day. So I decided to look into that behavior, look at how they approach water, how they take a sip. So to get the shot of a long-fingered bat drinking from a pen like this, that took me quite a lot of work. It took me over a year to actually get the technique right, to get the lighting right, In the process, I almost lost 2 cameras, and I actually did lose a couple of flashes, because in order to get close to the animal taking a sip, your camera has to actually be in the water. So the way I set up the shot was that I put a tripod completely underwater, with the camera being literally at the level of the water surface. And then I had to use multiple flashes. I believe I used 6 or 7 flashes to illuminate the background around the pond, and then I waited. And after about, I don't know, 700 or 1,000 trials, I eventually got the shot.
WildCare, an animal rescue organization based in Northern California, tracked the animals that were brought into its hospital after attack by house cat for 1 calendar year. They preserved the more than 200 bodies of those animals that did not survive. Each year, domestic cats kill an estimated 2 billion birds in the United States alone, in addition to billions of other animals. Melanie Piazza, the animal care director, had the idea for a photo shoot and invited me to document the animal remains. Since I spend 1 day each week volunteering at my local wildlife rescue, I could empathize with their efforts and was driven to create an image that could illustrate one significant impact our choices have on local wildlife. My challenge was to take hundreds of deceased animals and create something dignified, eye-catching, but without causing revulsion. The animals were removed from their tiny body bags and thawed. Melanie bandaged wounds all over again and even groomed some to make them more presentable. I spent hours arranging the animals on the floor. Once placed, many could not be moved because they were bleeding onto the white backdrop. The winning image was captured with a DSLR, mounted on an overhead pole, triggered remotely via tablet, and lit with 2 off-camera strobes and large softboxes. We hoped that the photo would serve as fuel for discussion on the many ways we can reduce the number of wild animals killed by our pets. It turned out to be effective. In addition to the worldwide publicity gained from the BigPicture competition, the photo had millions of views and hundreds of thousands of engagements on social media. Thank you to Melanie, WildCare, the California Academy of Sciences, and the contest jury for recognizing the importance of this controversial topic.
So thank you so much to Peter and Jack for those stories. And next we are very excited to welcome live Roie Galitz. And he'll be, there you are. Hi, Roie.
Hey, how are you? Good morning.
How are you?
Right here.
Yeah, we owe you the biggest thanks of all because you're based in Israel, which means you woke up at 3 in the morning to be here, right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, I hope you have coffee.
Yeah, well, I've got my coffee. I already finished it. And, you know, since we can't wake up this early for a flight, I might as well wake up this early to be with you virtually in BigPicture Awards in California.
That's, yeah, perfect. It's almost the same thing, right? Almost as good as actually going.
Yeah.
Okay, so viewers, Roie is an award-winning wildlife photographer and Greenpeace ambassador who for more than a decade has explored our planet's most remote places. From the Arctic to the Antarctic, he documents endangered animals in their natural habitats and speaks around the world about climate change, harnessing the power of photography to be what he often calls nature's voice, and to let us see the reality of what's happening in places on the edge. So Roie, you're going to be discussing how photography can support conservation efforts, and you're also going to cover some of your own favorite BigPicture winning and finalist images and what makes them special. So again, thank you so much for being here, and we will see you right after.
Sure. Thank you so much. It's great to be here, and I hope you're all doing great and keeping safe. So I'm a wildlife photographer, like many of you, and I use the power of photography to raise awareness for animals who are in threats of extinction. So I travel all over the world, and I think that photography is the most amazing tool to communicate those troubles and those problems. I mean, we use the voice of photography to show stories from all over the world. It can be from Africa, and it can be from extinction going on in British Columbia with the very rare spirit bear from the Great Bear Rainforest. And it can be a story of the Saiga antelope that I documented with the University of Moscow in the border between Russia and Kazakhstan, about these amazing antelope that within the last 30 years went from least concerned in the IUCN to critically endangered within 30 years, which is almost unprecedented. And these amazing stories can reach everyone and share those problems all over the world. Even when I went to Pantanal in Brazil, which is, by the way, suffering from devastating fires these days, I went there to photograph the jaguars, but I wasn't aware about this amazing animal's story. So this is the giant river otter, which has less than 5,000 animals left in the world. And again, I was shocked by how ignorant I was of their problems. And although I'm aware of many others, I'm always shocked to find new stories going out there. So I travel all over the world. I'm going to Antarctica and documenting the big meltdown of all the ecosystem over there. So these images that I'm showing you now have also won a lot of international awards, and that helps us, as with the Big Picture Awards, to raise awareness to those issues. And I think that these competitions, and Big Pictures, of course, is one of the top ones in the world, help us raise awareness, not only to those issues, but also among other photographers, and inspiring them to go to those places and also be a voice. Because I think that we are all voices together. And documenting stories like in Kamchatka. So this bear which was also on a cover of a magazine, is also an inspiring act. And photography can show us not only this amazing angle of the bear's motivation to hunt fish, but also with newer techniques like drones, we can get new and innovating approaches, like this photo, which I took from above, showing the bear and the salmon surrounding it. So photography can really show us the entire process, like we've seen before with the images, with the techniques going on, of these stories that can inspire other people to go out there and be the best wildlife photographers or nature photographers that they can be. This photo was also on the cover of Nikon Pro magazine. So these stories, again, they inspire me and they inspire everybody else. In the Arctic, in the high Arctic, I went to Svalbard. It's a Norwegian territory archipelago, photographing animals like this Arctic fox, but mostly the project on the polar bears. So polar bears, as you all know, are really struggling with their survival as sea ice melts every year. So sharing those stories in a long-term documentary project is also a very important thing of part of my project. And as a Greenpeace ambassador, I'm also advocating mostly for the Arctic and the Antarctic, which are part of the goal of mine in Greenpeace. And thanks to those images, Greenpeace has also launched a campaign to stop oil and gas drilling near Svalbard in the Norwegian high Arctic. And here you can see the mother bear and two cubs breastfeeding. This image which also won in the Picture of the Year award, an image of a family of polar bears from a really low angle, showing the little cub looking between his mother's legs, again raising awareness. And I think that's what we do. And it's also exciting to think that in this day and age, there are still photos that hasn't been taken, which I think you and me and everybody else in the field should try to innovate and get those pictures. So, for example, the next photo I'm going to show you is one of a polar bear catching a seal through its breathing hole. So again, this is exciting to think that there are still things there that weren't photographed. And I encourage you and everybody to go out and research and find out that what hasn't been photographed and try to go out and get it. It's not always easy. It's not always simple. You also need a lot of luck, and you need a lot of persistence and perseverance. And you got to be addicted to your goal in order to achieve it. So it's not easy, but it's totally worth it. This is a polar bear walking in the midnight sun in Svalbard. And in the summertime, they all can be found on their sea ice, and they rely on the sea ice. And without sea ice, they can't hunt those seals like the ones I showed you before. So this polar bear, I called it Dreaming of Sea Ice. I called this photo, which is a very important photo in order to raise awareness and show the relationship between the polar bears and the sea ice, and how much they love their sea ice, and they count and rely on their sea ice. And without it, they will go extinct. And this is a true and sad fact. And not only polar bears, but all Arctic animals that rely on sea ice, like the walrus. And I think one of the last image I'm going to show you now is showing you the intelligence of polar bears and all animals. And a lot of the times I'm getting questions about polar bears and other animals, if they have a soul, if they do feel and they do think, and they're getting sad or happy or whatever. And I think that one of the key signs of intelligence is curiosity. And you can see in this photo a curious polar bear. And this guy, I was photographing him walking along the fjord, and suddenly he started walking towards me, leaving me no time. So we had to evacuate. And he came by and started looking through our lenses and just examining what is this thing that we're carrying around with us. So I think that polar bears are intelligent, and polar bears are curious, and polar bears have a soul, as people always ask me in my talks. And I think that it's our obligation to look after them and take care of them and make sure that not only that we were protecting the polar bears, but also protecting polar bears means protecting ourselves against global climate change and against sea level rise. And I think that we are all in this planet together, and this is the message that I'm trying to send out. So thank you very much. This is about my photos and my projects. And let's talk about the finalists on the Big Picture Award. So I looked at the images, and during the judging process, I was amazed by how many incredible photos were submitted and reached the finals stage. And it's humbling to see that there are so many amazing photographers out there. And the fact that we had such a hard time judging this contest, not only me, but all the judges, is a true sign about the amazing quality and potential that we still have out there. And I think that the field of nature photography is just getting better and better and better every year, which is amazing. So I'm going to talk about 3 photos. The first one, I have 3 photos of the finalists that I liked. The first one is this one by Juan Jesus Gonzalez Ahumada from Spain. And so this photo of the ibexes in the Pyrenees, I think it was, is a beautiful photo. And I liked not only the animals themselves, but mostly about the composition and the minimalistic approach, showing not only an animal's portrait, but an animal's environmental portrait, the animal in their surrounding, which is beautiful composition, and with the nice mist and atmosphere that we got to it, which is really intriguing, and that's what I liked about it. In this photo, we can see this Emanuele Bighi from Genova, Italy, and I really liked the composition on this one and the lighting. And we have this nice intimate approach, and I can only imagine the photographer in the field getting his camera inside those leaves and getting this nice intimate feeling, which is very nicely composed and framed. and the leading of the eyes with the veins of the leaf from above. And I think that it's just a beautiful, beautiful photo. And the last one I'm going to talk is this one in Antarctica, which not only shows us the nice leading of the eye. I'm going to talk mostly about photography after Luiz talked about the science of it. I'm going to talk about the photography part. And you can see the leading of the eye with the penguin's line going from the bottom left to the upper right. But not only that, but you also get at the sense of Antarctica with the snowdrift and the fur seal in the front interacting with the penguin, and in the upper left third corner, you can see the elephant seals on the beach, and you have that kind of out of focus into the fog image of the background. So I think that these are three amazing photos that I'm really happy to see as finalists. I think they're also worth mentioning, and thank you very much for the photographers and everyone for participating, and of course our chair and the entire BigPicture team. So thank you.
Hi, Roie. Those really are amazing, but your work is so extraordinary, and I'm so glad we got to see some of it. I wanted to ask, was driving awareness about climate change always a focus of your work, or was that a shift that you made deliberately at some point?
So it's a shift. I wasn't such an environmentalist before, but after going to Svalbard and seeing that, I mean, Svalbard changed me. And seeing that change happening so fast. I mean, I thought that, everybody knows about global warming, but when you see it and you come to that point where you go visit the iceberg, the glacier year after year, and you see that the glacier is almost gone, I mean, that just shook me. And that's one of the things that I talked about when I spoke at the United Nations in 2020, just showing the huge difference between year and year on the same spot, which is just shocking.
Yeah, and I wonder, because that things happen so quickly or change so quickly now, and because COVID has made travel difficult for all of us, including photographers, are you worried about the kind of lapse in documenting those areas until we're able to travel freely again?
Well, I do, of course, and I think that we are all looking forward to the day that COVID is gone and we can go back to our beloved routine. But I think that it's not that the gap is not such a great difference, and I think that nature is recovering all over the world without tourism and with less air travel and with less pollution going on because people are staying at home. So I think there is good coming with the bad sort of thing.
And we can continue to use the work already done to talk about it in the meantime, I guess. So I know this is probably an impossible question, but I wanted to, and maybe you get asked all the time, but is there one moment or interaction with an animal that just comes to mind and that you just never forget?
Well, there are countless ones,
Yeah.
and I'll go again back to Svalbard, and I think that the interaction that I mostly remember is the polar bear chasing us away and looking for the cameras. And I think, I didn't see that coming because he was just so cool and walking around the fjord, and then suddenly he just made a walk directly at us. And again, we have communication as wildlife photographers. We always communicate with the animals, even when I'm photographing walruses or cheetahs or lions. I mean, we're all communicating, and I'm always getting their approval in order to get closer. So when a walrus doesn't want me to come near, it just goes like this. So I stay back. But when the walrus is relaxed and maybe even falling asleep, that's a huge compliment. Because when an animal goes to sleep in front of us, wildlife photographers, it means that it trusts us with her or his eyes wide shut. And we never go to sleep when we're stressed. So I'm always hoping that animals will fall asleep in front of me. I know it sounds weird. But I think that's when you know that you can work with this animal endlessly. I mean, as long as you have that mutual respect. And I think that's key. Respect wildlife and respect their habitat. We are just guests in their home. Yeah.
Well, I'll just ask this one last question, which is, do you have any advice for beginning or aspiring photographers wildlife photographers who really want to step it up?
So, of course, there is. I think the most important key is learn and just be inspired by many photographers like the ones we see today, And I think that imitation is the best form of study. And after you imitate, then you can start innovate. So look at other photos, examine how they were photographed, try to imitate that, and then bring your own unique approach and angle into that equation. And the second part is just go out there. It doesn't have to be to Svalbard or Antarctica, whatever. Just even go to your own backyard nature and start, you don't have to go all over the world. Just find a project that you can photograph and do that project long term and get that unique approach, unique angle that only you can, because it's in your backyard. So just go out there and photograph and experiment. That's the best thing you can do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for showing us your work. And thank you for giving up all of your sleep to be here with us tonight. We so appreciate it. And I hope you get some sleep now. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Okay, so we are going to move back into our category winners again. And we're going to hear from Edwin Giesberg, who's this year's first place winner of the Landscapes, Waterscapes, and Flora category. Edwin's been a professional nature photographer for more than 15 years and currently lives in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. And in this video, he highlights the subject of his winning photo, which is also the title, a carnivorous little plant called the sundew.
There are 3 species in the Netherlands, the small, round and long sundew. They are irresistible to insects. The small sundew is the most common species. They are small plants that you quickly pass by during a walk in a fen area. From a distance, they often only stand out as small red balls among the vegetation. But it's worth taking a closer look. They lure their prey with temptations, such as delicious scents, striking colors and nectar. Do they capture them very ingeniously via traps, drowning and sticky substances, and then digest them? We're talking about carnivorous plants. There are more than 600 species of plants, spread over 5 families, that have focused on catching prey. A genus of carnivorous plants, consisting of almost 200 species, of which 3 also occur in the Netherlands, is sundew. The leaves are strewn with glandular hairs, with many drops that sparkle beautifully when the sunlight falls on the plant. But there's also a danger in these glandular hairs, because there is a sticky substance with which they catch all kinds of small animals.
Wonderful. Okay, next up, we are so happy to welcome live Amy Vitale, winner of the 2020 Photo Story category for her Guardian Warriors series. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
So glad you're here. Okay. Yeah. So the theme for this year's photo story was coexistence, for which we challenge photographers to submit entries that document the remarkable, fast-changing ways that we share the planet with other species and what our future together might look like. So Amy's going to talk about documenting the really, really, truly inspiring story of coexistence between the Samburu people of northern Kenya and the wildlife that they protect. But Amy, before I hand it over to you, I'm going to tell viewers a little bit more about you. You have traveled to more than 100 countries on assignment, where you've witnessed civil unrest and violence, but also surreal beauty and the enduring power of the human spirit. You've lived in mud huts and war zones, contracted malaria, and you've even donned a panda suit, which is all in keeping with your philosophy of living the story. You're a photographer for National Geographic, a Nikon ambassador, a 5-time recipient of the World Press Photo Awards, and so much more. Thank you, Amy. Please take it away, and we'll see you right after.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everybody. And first, I just want to say thank you. This has been so much fun listening to all of the previous speakers. You know, I'm a huge fan of all of you, and it's been wonderful to hear all these stories behind the stories. And anyway, I'll just dive in and also say, oh, happy World Rhino Day. And it's perfect because I'm going to talk about my introduction into you know, I actually don't consider myself a wildlife photographer. I really consider myself more of a, you know, telling our stories really of coexistence. So it was so perfect that that you made a entry that was called that. I just got very excited when I saw it. I'm calling this Wild Hope because I really believe that we need it right now more than ever, and that hope will save us. And and let me just get back to this presentation. And I'm going to start about my introduction. As you mentioned already, I actually began my career really as a photojournalist, covering the worst atrocities of humanity, and saw the worst of what we're capable of. And then in 2009, on a snowy December day in the Czech Republic, I heard about this story where they were going to be moving 4 of the last northern white rhinos back to Africa, to a conservancy in Kenya called Old Pejeta. And when I heard this story that they were flying rhinos on a DHL airplane, I was like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I have to go and cover this. And this is for all of you out there that apply for grants and ask, pitch stories and get rejection after rejection. If you can believe it, I was rejected by everybody. And so I had the courage to write them back and say, well, what about this story is uninteresting? And they all came back and said the exact same thing, which was, it'd be a great story for radio, but we don't think it's going to be visual. And I was like, I don't think they're right. I'm still going to go ahead and do this. And I really learned back then that nobody's going to ever imagine the story that you want to tell. And very often you just have to go out and do it and then show them. And that's what I did. And little did I know that this story, these rhinos, literally changed my life. They just stopped me in my tracks. And when you look at this picture, you can instantly understand that they are prehistoric animals. They've been roaming this planet for millions of years and had survived this long, but they could not survive us, mankind, because at the time there were only 8 of them alive, all in zoos. And something about meeting them it broke my heart. I felt like I had met a unicorn. I mean, look at them. And this is the scene at the zoo right before they're leaving. It's snowing outside. You can't believe that, we've reduced an entire species to this. I mean, the Czech Králové Zoo they do a phenomenal job, but this is just, they actually saved these rhinos from extinction, really. They had been poached in the wild already. And this is how we imagine rhinos roaming the open plains of Africa, but this is actually what it looks like today. They have to be guarded 24/7 by heavily militarized men. And when I began this story, I wanted to understand why. Why is this happening? And I'm so sorry to show these horrific images, but it is not just rhinos. It's a whole host of species, from elephants that we hear about to all kinds of species that we don't even hear about. And as I started to research and examine this story, I realized that we were always telling the story through the lens of the solution was to militarize people more and, kill the poachers. But we always left out one very important critical piece of the story, which is, what do the people living with these animals think? The indigenous populations living side by side. And I just felt like I needed to dig into this. And I found beautiful stories. This is Yusuf sleeping with 3 baby black rhinos who had been orphaned. That's a different species than the northern white rhino, but they are also threatened. All rhinos are. But I kind of went down this rabbit hole trying to find stories of wild hope, because it exists. And there's amazing stories that I think motivate us to get out and try to change the trajectory we're on. These are Samburu warriors touching baby orphan black rhinos. And they were really, the amazing thing about this is that they are functionally extinct in the landscape where these men came from. And they had a dream to bring some back. And their dream came true. They did bring them back, and they've already had 6 babies. They took 10 or 11 rhinos from a place where they're doing really well and actually have too many of them in one part of Kenya, moved them up there and started a new conservancy. But this is the story that I was awarded. Thank you. I am simply the messenger. The real heroes and winners are the people. This is Lakupanai, who is the most magical man. I honestly can't speak one word of the same language he speaks Samburu, but we understand each other. I've known him for a long time, and he just lights my heart up. And the giraffes, they've been rewilded already, returned to the wild, and they come back in the morning to check in on Lacoop and I. That is not a lie. That is a true story, and it is the most extraordinary thing to see these relationships. And I do believe that actually, when you go back in history, we do know how to live with wildlife and coexist. And there is a lot of knowledge, and we just have to, I think, reimagine a different future and protect these habitats like our lives depend on it, because they do. And this is the Twiga project, and these Kenyans, the Twiga Walinzi team goes into the schools, and they teach them all about the giraffes. And this is one of the girls who asked me to take this picture because they learned all about giraffes, and then everybody got to kind of play giraffe. And it was an extraordinary thing, because the school kids, that they live right next to amazing habitat with giraffes living there. And we asked them how many had actually seen a giraffe in the wild. It's in a nearby village. And out of like 35 kids, only 7 had seen a giraffe in the wild. And this is at Lewa Wildlife Conservancy, and these are those same Samburu men touching an orphan black rhino for the first time in their lives. And to them, it was the most magical experience. They couldn't believe that they were touching this creature. But this story really is about people like Kamara here on the right, with his orphaned rhino Khalifi that he's raised since it was 1 day old. They are the real heroes, and I do believe that by shining a light on them, they have truly committed their lives to protecting these animals. This is our best hope for the future. You know, when we empower communities that are protecting wildlife that they live with, we have a much better shot of all living together. And then this is another little piece of the story, which is the Ruteti Elephant Sanctuary that I've been having the privilege of working with them from the very beginning, when it was actually only a dream, and their dream became true. And one of my favorite parts of the story, this is Mary Lengies, and she is one of the first female elephant keepers in all of Africa. And it's a beautiful story, not just about wildlife. It's actually about the people that we that also live with the wildlife. I feel like our stories are interlinked, and if we start telling stories about people living with wildlife, maybe that gives us a way forward. And then just to flash back quickly, since it is World Rhino Day, to tell you there's a beautiful sort of twist of fate to this long story about the northern white rhinos. Many of you probably know that there's only 2 of these rhinos left today, Najin and Fatu. They're 2 females. And I've been covering this for so long, and they told me the day that Sudan was about to die, they actually told me before to hurry back, and I did. And I was there for this really heartbreaking moment that honestly still brings me to tears every time. I can't express how heartbreaking and why this image has such a meaning for me and an impact. And I think it's because I look at it and I recognize immediately that the future's in our hands. It's up to us to decide which path we're going to take. Do we want to be like Jojo and protect these ancient, gentle, hulking creatures that we coexist with? Or do we want to just watch not just their demise, but frankly, it's watching our own demise, because our fates are absolutely linked. And I know everybody listening here knows that, so I won't go on. But, the beautiful twist of fate here is now that I hope this story is not a story about extinction, which is what I thought I was documenting in the beginning, but hopefully it's a story about us coming together and being the best that we can be, And this is, there's a consortium right now called the Biorescue Team, and it's a group of scientists, international group from Germany, the Czech Republic, Kenya, Japan, Italy, coming together to save this species using science now. And that is Thomas Hildebrandt and his amazing colleagues, and just there's a whole list of names and people, but they are actually working on this right now as we speak to save this this species from extinction. And I will keep you posted as it unfolds. I was just there a few weeks ago to do another oocyte pickup from the last 2 females. But I think I'm going to wrap it up and let us do some Q&A. And yeah, that's it.
Amy, this is extraordinary. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I need to stop sharing the screen? Is that what needs to happen?
You don't need to do a thing. We have magic behind the scenes.
Okay, great.
So I wanted to ask more about the rhinos, just because they, you know, they if you've never interacted with them, or if just by reputation, I suppose they're intimidating and a little scary, and they seem so tough. And one of the things that's so powerful about your work is that you just see this entirely different animal when you look at those images. And I wonder if there's anything that you have learned about rhinos over all the years you spent documenting them that you'd really like to share, or that you'd like people to know.
Oh, I don't think we have enough time for that. But here's the thing. Well, those 2 northern white rhinos they're pretty much, they grew up in zoos for the most part. I mean, Sudan was in the wild as a baby, but the other 2 were born in the zoo. So they're a little bit more domesticated, and they are, you know, hulking creatures that you do not want to get in the path of, but at the same time, they actually recognize my smell at this point. I go there and they will come up to me. I'll, you know, give them my scent, and they I think know who I am. At least the keepers tell me that. And I think that they are gentle creatures. Rhinos actually weirdly remind me of pandas a lot, because they just want to be left alone. You know, they are solitary creatures. They do not want to interact with us, really. It's a different story again with these slightly domesticated animals, because the keepers are their protectors, and they have this extraordinary relationship with the keepers themselves. But I will say, with, you know, for example, the picture of Lacupini and that orphan giraffe that he rescued and then sent back to the wild, it's interesting to see the behavior changing. So the giraffes in that landscape used to be very afraid of humans. Mm-hmm. And since they've rescued so many orphans and sent them back to the wild, the orphans that have been rewilded have actually changed the behavior of the wild ones, because now you can sort of like drive and get a little bit closer to them than you ever could in the past. And that's kind of amazing. But I just sort of have been working in that landscape now for about 11 years and watching the transformation over time when, you know, people that once feared certain animals are now respecting them and protecting them. And for example, injured elephants that have been shot or wounded by a spear in a different part of Kenya will come rushing in to these conservancies where they know they're safe.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm fascinated by getting to know the animals themselves, the people involved, and you just start understanding that we can coexist. I think I got off topic from your original question. Sorry.
No, I think it went exactly where it should have gone. It's great. I also love I think so. Roie, right before you was talking about how the ultimate compliment for him is when an animal falls asleep, because it indicates trust. And I think also an animal recognizing your scent and being okay with that is pretty special as well. Yeah. So I wanted to ask about about your winning series. And I think you spent, as you mentioned, just years and years, a decade, I think, building trust with local communities to make that happen. And you've said that trust didn't come easily. And I wonder if there was a particular turning point in your relationship with them, or if it really was just the steady building of a relationship.
Oh, I think it's just proving yourself over time and showing your true colors, being completely transparent. And it's not just with the people, it's also with the animals. They know, I've been with the elephants in particular. There was one elephant named Shaba who came in as a 2-year-old, and she was very aggressive because her mother had been shot. And literally the sound of my camera, the metallic sound of the shutter, I think reminded her of a gun. And she sent people to hospital, and she would try to charge me all the time. And it literally took years for her to accept me into the herd. And I remember this one moment when I was walking among the herd, and she walked right by me and brushed her trunk against me. And I was like, oh my God, I've been accepted by Shaba. Oh my God. So that was amazing. And then, people, I just feel like we are more than just storytellers. We can actually become ambassadors in a way, and just by sharing their story, drawing attention to their important work. And that's, I just think having great humility in what we do always, and really, I just feel extraordinarily privileged to have had access and the trust to let me tell their story in an authentic way. And oh my gosh, somebody's trying to reach me. Let me try to turn this phone off. But yeah, so yep, it just takes time and just, chipping away at it. I'm so sorry, my phone's
It's okay. It's probably like a new story.
They're all calling now.
No worries at all. Well, thank you so much for sharing that work and talking us through it. And it is really powerful. And I think myself and our audience is, honored to hear you talk about that.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm just the messenger. Thank you so much for what you do and giving a platform for so many of us. It's such an honor.
Thank you so much. Good night. So next, our last video of the evening, I'd like to introduce you to our first place winner of our Art of Nature category. This is Juan Jesus Gonzalez Omada, a self-taught photographer who you heard referenced early in the program for a different photo. He's based in Malaga, Spain, and spent his childhood immersed in nature, filling sketchbooks with local flora and fauna, which really seeded his passion for wildlife photography. In the video, Juan Jesus transports us to the Rio Tinto in Spain, which is the subject of his winning photo, Snowbreak, which offers spectacular colors and textures thanks to a really unique mix of sediment, minerals, and flow.
Fue a finales del otoño del pasado año, cuando regresé aquí a Río Tinto con un grupo de amigos. Ellos nunca habían estado aquí en la zona, entonces les acompañé para guiarles por ciertos lugares del entorno que son bastante atractivos para tomar fotografías. Cuando bajamos y llegamos aquí al puente justo que tengo a mi espalda, al cruzar y mirar hacia abajo, fue cuando descubrimos unas ciertas texturas que eran bastante peculiares, que finalmente resultaron como la imagen ganadora. Bueno, hay mucha gente que se pregunta qué vemos en esta imagen. En esta imagen lo que vemos concretamente es una acumulación de sedimentos que están producidos por la subida del caudal del río. Cuando llegan las lluvias otoñales, la corriente del río arrolla todo este tipo de material y lo deposita en la orilla. En la imagen concreta lo que podemos ver es una zona exterior con un sedimento más arenoso y con tonos fríos, y la zona interior es un material arcilloso con un tono más cálido que está cuarteado con motivo de la insolación. Yo creo que el puntito final de la imagen es ese rayo de sol que se cuela a través del bosque e ilumina la parte central de la imagen. Bueno, Río Tinto es sin duda alguna uno de mis lugares preferidos para escaparme a realizar fotografía. Realmente es un entorno espectacular que nos ofrece muchas posibilidades para captar imágenes únicas, ya sean reflejos, texturas, tomas aéreas, en definitiva, para dejar volar nuestra creatividad.
So that is our program for the evening. But before we wrap up, we wanted to take a moment to revisit this year's amazing competition winners. And in addition to continuing to recognize established photographers, we're also really excited to announce a new grant for emerging photographers aged 18 to 25. Our goal is to support and encourage young photographers with fresh approaches to share that unique perspective with the world. So please follow any of BigPicture's social media accounts to learn more about this year's 2 grant recipients and the really incredible projects they'll be working on in the coming months. As we end, a reminder that next year's competition kicks off December 1st and is open to photography enthusiasts and professionals alike worldwide and offers $12K in cash prizes. Visit bigpicturecompetition.org to subscribe to emails for the latest competition news. And in closing, I want to quickly recognize some of the Academy people who work all year long behind the scenes to make this competition possible, namely Creative Director Rhonda Rubenstein and her time and Digital Director Amy Wong. With that, thank you so much again to everyone watching, and the biggest thank you of all to all of the photographers out there working to document and protect and fight for the places, wildlife, and people that make this planet so remarkable. Thank you and good night.